The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows over the barren plains of Viridot, a harsh planet on the edge of the human frontier. Here the land stretched endlessly, a mixture of cracked earth and dry grass interrupted only by jagged mountains in the distance. Viridot was a place where settlers came to escape the laws and expectations of the crowded cities. It was a place of second chances, and for Talon Kane it was home. Talon had always preferred solitude. The ranch he had built with his own hands sat on the edge of a wide, dry valley, far from the busy spaceports and noisy towns. His cattle grazed on the sparse grass, and his days were spent repairing fences, tending to the animals, and watching the sky change with the setting sun. His only company was the wind and the occasional visitor, usually someone seeking refuge from the law, or those who had nowhere else to go. But in the 4 years since he had settled on Viridot, he had learned not to expect much company. It was just him and the land. One evening, as he rode his horse across the dusty earth to check on his herd, Talon noticed something unusual. A figure small and solitary appeared on the horizon. It was a girl, a young woman with long black hair, dressed in tattered clothes and riding a horse like she had been born on the plains. Her movements were wild, almost animalistic, as she guided the horse across the rough terrain with a kind of grace that only came from years of survival in the wilderness. Talon slowed his horse, his eyes narrowing as he watched her. She was no ordinary traveler. There was something fierce about her, something untamed. As she neared, Talon could see the sharpness in her eyes that had seen far more than most people could ever imagine. The girl didn't seem to notice Talon at first. She was focused on her horse, urging it onward, her voice soft but firm. Talon knew immediately she wasn't from around here. He had seen enough newcomers to know that the people who came to Viridot were often desperate, but this girl had a different air about her. She was wild, and in a place like Viridot that was something to be respected. "Hey," Talon called out, his voice rough from years of silence. The girl's head snapped around, her eyes flashing with caution. She pulled the reins of the horse, slowing the animal to a stop. Her gaze met Talon's, and for a moment there was a silence between them, as if the entire world had paused to watch. "You lost?" Talon asked, though he already knew the answer. He had seen many like her, people who had found their way to the edges of the world, seeking something they could never quite explain. The girl didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him, as if measuring whether he was friend or foe. Talon didn't move, his hands resting loosely on the reins of his own horse. Finally, the girl spoke, her voice low and steady. "Not lost. Just passing through." Talon nodded, watching her closely. There was a fire in her eyes, the kind that told him she had seen her share of trouble. "This is a hard land for passing through," he said. "What brings you here?" The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced around the vast, empty landscape. "Looking for something," she muttered, almost to herself. Talon wasn't one to push, so he didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he offered a simple gesture, pointing to the ranch in the distance. "You can rest for a while if you need it. I've got some space." The girl hesitated, clearly not used to accepting help, but after a long moment she nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now, as if she were letting down a guard she had carried for a long time. As they rode in silence toward the ranch, Talon couldn't help but notice how the girl handled the horse. She didn't seem to be just riding, it was more like she was part of the animal. Her movements were fluid, instinctual. She guided the horse with a kind of ease that made it clear she had been born to ride. When they reached the ranch, Talon dismounted and tied his horse to the post. The girl did the same, though she moved with a kind of grace that was almost unnatural. She was quiet, surveying the land around her as if she were already plotting her next move. "Make yourself at home," Talon said, stepping toward the small house where he spent most of his time. He didn't expect her to stay long, most visitors didn't, but there was something about this girl that made him want to help her. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself. Or maybe it was just the fact that she was different from anyone he had met in a long time. The girl followed him into the house, but didn't sit right away. She stood near the door, her eyes scanning the room as if it were a battlefield. Talon shrugged and went to the kitchen, grabbing a drink of water. He didn't mind the silence, it had become a companion to him over the years. After a few moments, the girl spoke again. "I've been running a long time," she said, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "From something. From someone. Talon turned to her, raising an eyebrow. What are you running from? The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared out the window, her eyes distant, lost in thoughts of another time. My name is Zoya, she said after a long pause. I come from the old lands. From Earth. Talon didn't ask any more questions. He knew better than to push too hard. Instead, he simply nodded. Well, Zoya, he said, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. For the next few days, Zoya stayed quietly at the ranch. She didn't say much, but Talon could tell she was a survivor. She worked alongside him, fixing fences, tending to the animals, and getting used to the rhythm of life on Viridot. She was fast, efficient, and strong. No job seemed too hard for her. But it wasn't just the work that impressed Talon. It was the way she handled herself. Zoya was wild, yes, but she was also smart. Her instincts were sharp, and she had a way of reading the land that Talon had only seen in the most experienced of ranchers. She moved like someone who had lived in the wilderness her whole life, like someone who belonged to the land. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Talon found Zoya standing outside, looking out over the open plains. She had a look of longing in her eyes, as if there was something she was searching for, something she had lost a long time ago. Do you ever miss it? Zoya asked suddenly, her voice soft but filled with a depth that made Talon pause. Miss what? He asked, not sure what she meant. Earth, she said, her gaze distant. The old world. Talon didn't answer right away. He hadn't thought much about Earth in years. For him, Viridot was home. I don't miss Earth, he finally said, but I know it was a place where things were different. People were different, Zoya nodded slowly. I think people were stronger back then, she said. But now, they're weak. They don't know how to survive like they did before. Talon didn't disagree. There was a quiet truth in her words. But in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. Zoya was stronger than anyone he had ever met. She was wild, yes, but in this broken world, that might just be the one thing that would keep her alive. The day stretched on in quiet harmony at Talon's ranch. Zoya had become a part of the rhythm of the land, learning the ways of the cattle and the land in a way that felt almost natural. She worked silently alongside Talon, her skills evident in every task she took on. Whether it was mending fences or tending to the horses, her presence, wild as it was, seemed to blend with the vast wilderness of Viridot. But despite the calm of those days, Talon noticed something changing in Zoya. There was a restlessness in her, a longing he could see in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. It was a kind of quiet hunger, a pull toward something greater than the quiet life they had built together. Talon knew she wasn't made for staying in one place for long. Zoya was wild, and no amount of time spent on the ranch could change that. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Zoya walked to the edge of the property, standing on a hill that overlooked the vast, empty plains. The wind tugged at her dark hair, and she stood there, as if waiting for something or someone. Talon rode up beside her, his eyes following hers across the open land. You're thinking about leaving, aren't you? He asked, his voice steady but full of understanding. Zoya didn't answer at first. She just looked out over the land, the endless stretches of dry grass and rocky hills that seemed to go on forever. I have to, she finally said, her voice low and filled with a quiet determination. There's something out there, something I need to find, something I left behind. Talon didn't ask what it was. He knew better than to push too hard. But he understood. Zoya wasn't meant to be confined by the walls of the ranch or the quiet life he had built. She was a force of nature, and the land she had been born from could never be contained. I'll help you get there, Talon said simply, his voice firm, but you don't have to do it alone. Zoya turned to him, her eyes softening just a little. I know, but I have to do it on my own terms. And so the next morning, Zoya saddled the horse Talon had given her. The horse, a strong and loyal animal, was more than just a companion. It was a symbol of the bond between them. Talon watched her as she mounted the horse with practiced ease, the wild girl becoming one with the animal once again. She had become as much a part of the land as the dust and the wind. Before she left, Zoya turned to Talon. Thank you, she said simply. For everything, Talon nodded. Ride fast, ride hard, and don't forget where you came from. With a final glance toward him, Zoya spurred the horse forward, her long hair flying behind her like a banner in the wind. She rode like she was born to do nothing else, her body moving in perfect harmony with the horse beneath her. Talon watched her disappear into the horizon, feeling a strange mix of pride and worry in his chest. Zoya didn't know it yet, but the world she was heading toward was nothing like the peaceful ranch life she had left behind. Days passed, and the peaceful life Talon had built on Viridor felt emptier without Zoya's presence. The wind still whispered through the empty plains, but there was a silence now, a hollow space where Zoya's wild spirit had once been. Talon tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the girl he had helped, the girl who had ridden away with nothing but her strength and determination. But then, one evening, the silence was broken. A loud, distant roar echoed across the plains, shaking the ground beneath Talon's feet. It was the unmistakable sound of an attack ship, its engines roaring as it made its descent toward Viridor. Talon's heart skipped a beat. He knew what that sound meant, and he knew that Zoya wasn't prepared for what was coming. He immediately mounted his horse and rode out toward the source of the noise, his mind racing with worry. He didn't know who was attacking or why, but he knew that whatever was happening, it couldn't be good. As he rode, the sky darkened and the wind picked up, swirling dust in every direction. He could see the shadows of ships now, their massive forms blocking out the stars. Talon's instincts kicked in. There was something off about these ships. They were not just ordinary raiders. They were part of something bigger, something far more dangerous. When Talon reached the edge of the plains, he saw them. The mercenaries, a group of ruthless soldiers who had been terrorizing Viridor for weeks. They had come looking for something. Talon didn't know what, but he had a feeling it wasn't good. Zoya had ridden straight into danger. Talon's heart pounded as he rode faster, his mind racing. He had to find Zoya before the mercenaries did. He knew the terrain better than anyone, and he had a good sense of where she might be. The mercenaries, on the other hand, were ruthless and well-equipped. They would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, and Talon knew they wouldn't hesitate to hurt Zoya if they found her. He reached the top of a ridge, scanning the horizon. His eyes widened as he spotted a figure in the distance. It was her, Zoya, but she wasn't alone. Zoya was surrounded by the mercenaries, her horse backed into a corner, but she didn't look afraid. In fact, she looked more dangerous than ever. She stood tall, her wild eyes flashing with defiance as she faced off against the mercenaries. "Leave her alone," Talon shouted, drawing his gun. He knew he couldn't take them all on alone, but he wasn't going to stand by and let them hurt her. Zoya glanced up at him, her expression unreadable, but for a brief moment, their eyes met. And in that look, Talon saw something that made his heart race. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. The mercenaries turned to face Talon, their weapons drawn. "You should have stayed out of this, rancher," one of them sneered, aiming his weapon at him. But Zoya was faster. In a blur of motion, she disarmed the mercenary and knocked him to the ground with a swift move. Talon's heart swelled with pride. She was a force of nature. Together they fought back, each one of them using their surroundings to their advantage. Zoya moved like the wind, her every move calculated and deadly. Talon used his experience with the land, setting traps and distracting the mercenaries long enough to give Zoya the chance to strike. When the last of the mercenaries fell, the two of them stood amidst the wreckage of their enemies. Zoya's eyes were fierce, but there was something different in them now. A respect for Talon and for the land they had fought to protect. "I told you," Talon said, breathing heavily. "You don't have to do it alone." Zoya turned to him, her face softening for the first time since she had ridden away. "I know," she said quietly, "and I won't forget it." As the two of them stood there, the wind howling around them, Talon realized something. Zoya wasn't just a wild girl who had needed a place to rest. She was a warrior, and together they had just fought for the future of Viridor.